Hello and welcome to webinar number 3 in American English Live Series 22. We're so happy that you all are here with us today. I am Dr. Darlene Wiggins-Dockery, and I will be your host, along with our moderators behind the scene, Elena and Javid, who will be responding to your comments in the chat or the comments box. We wanted to let you know that the webinar will be recorded and available on various platforms. By attending and adding your comments during today's webinar, your name, your country, and or comments may be included in the video. So by participating, you are consenting to your comments being shared in the recording and for its use for the purposes of FHI 360 and the U.S. Department of State. If you do not want to appear in the recording, please do not put comments in the chat box or in the comments section. Throughout Series 22, we will explore a variety of strategies for fostering student motivation and engagement in the English language classroom. We hope you'll be able to use the practical ideas that we share. So here's what you can expect today. The webinar is about 60 minutes long, and our webinar presenter will present the material, and I, as your host, will ask questions and comment as well. But we really want to hear from you, our audience, so that we can address your ideas and your experiences. At the end of today's webinar, there will be a short attendance quiz available for the chance to earn a digital badge. More details about this will be available at the end of today's webinar. Now, for today's webinar, promoting motivation and engagement in the adult language classroom. Adult learners are unique with distinct learning needs and preferences. They often face conflicting life responsibilities and pressures, which can filter into the learning environment and create additional challenges to their motivation, engagement, and sustained progress in English language learning. Educators can employ strategies to help adult learners overcome these challenges and thrive in the English language classroom. In this webinar, we will explore techniques for fostering adult learners' motivation and engagement across various language levels and in both classroom and virtual environments. Participants will walk away with actionable tips and strategies they can readily implement to better support their adult students' needs and prepare them for success in the English language classroom. And we are pleased to introduce our presenter, Jennifer Rives. Jennifer is the English Program Manager for a US-based healthcare company that recruits international registered nurses and therapists from over 70 countries. Previously, she served as an English program instructor with the same organization. Jennifer earned her master's in applied linguistics TESOL from the University of South Florida and has teaching experience with adult learners in the United States, Thailand, and China. She also led 4 secondary school study abroad programs in China with the Council on International Educational Exchange. Jennifer is from Florida and enjoys time at the beach, kayaking, cooking, antiquing, and learning languages. Welcome, Jennifer.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for the introduction, Darlene. I'm excited to be here with all of you today. In today's webinar, we'll talk all about increasing motivation and engagement in the adult language classroom. Before we get started, just wanted to share a bit of my personal experience teaching adult learners. So I started teaching adult students at a language center in Tampa, Florida in 2020, and I've been working exclusively with adult learners ever since. I've actually had the privilege of teaching adult learners from all regions of the world, including Asia, Africa, Europe, and North and South America. I've also taught adult learners in community college and English for specific purposes settings in the context of healthcare. I've taught adult learners in virtual, face-to-face, and hybrid classroom settings, as well as across language proficiency levels. So using my range of experience in adult education, I developed this webinar in the hopes that it will equip you with actionable tips and strategies that you can implement into your teaching practice to meet the learning needs of your adult students and help them be more prepared to succeed in the English language classroom. So let's start our webinar by going over our agenda for today. In this session, we will review who adult learners are and common barriers to motivation they may face. We'll explore strategies for maintaining adult learners' engagement and motivation, and we'll discuss additional techniques for supporting adult learners of various proficiency levels. Before we move on to the next slide, I think it's important that we start with a definition of what we mean by adult learner for the purposes of this webinar. An adult learner is generally defined as someone 25 years or older who is engaged in learning activities, often for personal or professional development. Adult learners may also be referred to as non-traditional students in post-secondary education contexts. So to start us off today, I'd like for everyone to share if you've taught adult learners before. If you have, or even if you haven't, I'd also like you to share what makes adult learners different from other groups of students, like college or university students. Please take a moment to share your thoughts and ideas with us in the chat.
Jennifer, this topic is so near and dear to my heart because adult learners were my entree into TESOL. And so I can't wait to see what our participants have to say. And we're already getting responses. We heard from Manuel, who said, I'm currently working at an adult school. People who work and have many other responsibilities and duties is how Manuel defines what makes an adult learner. Then we heard from Jacqueline, who said, Sure, I am now. Selma said, No, but I think they are the most embarrassed, if you think about a characteristic, perhaps when making mistakes. Then we heard from Jacqueline, who said adults are less likely to participate in the class due to a lack of confidence. Raul said, yes, they do not have as much time as youngsters to dedicate to the language and are often driven by career goals or purposes. Emma said, I think they have more maturity and seriousness. And then we heard from Santi, who said they are motivated to learn a new language. Elena said, yes, I have taught adult learners. They are more motivated to study since they set clear objectives related to their professional careers. Valley said, I haven't, but I think the difference is that adults sometimes are more shy than children. So those are some of the responses that we have. And I have to tell you that Selma is excited. She said this is an interesting topic. So back to you, Jennifer.
Awesome. Thanks everyone for sharing with us. Those were some great ideas to get us started. All right. So now let's turn our attention to our review of who adult learners are. So, starting from the top left on the slide, adult learners often have the responsibility of balancing work and family obligations along with education requirements. This can create additional layers of time and scheduling pressure for adult students when pursuing their education. Because adult learners often pursue English study to achieve personal or professional goals, they tend to be very results oriented and focused on achieving specific goals. They want to know the material they're learning is relevant to their goals, and they want to see evidence that they're making progress toward their goals. This is where the importance of feedback comes in. Adult learners value explicit, in the moment feedback on their language use so they can assess their progress and development. Because they really want to connect the language learned in class directly to their goals, adult learners also value practical application and real world scenarios over more theoretical content. They want to make direct connections, again, to what they're learning in class and how they can apply that information to accomplish tasks of daily and personal and professional life. Adult learners also seek clear expectation setting from their instructor so they know exactly what's expected of them in class and what they need to do to see results in their studies. Similarly, adult learners use their prior education and life experience as a foundation for guiding their learning. While this can help in some instances, it can also make some learners less receptive to new ideas, particularly if the ideas do not match with their prior experience. In either case, adult learners really want to know the why behind what they're learning and why they're learning it to be able to relate it to their established ideas. Lastly, adult learners want to be responsible for and in control of their learning. As such, they often seek autonomy and less structured learning environments to help them juggle all their responsibilities in a way that works best for them. They can often benefit from options when it comes to completing assignments, such as writing an essay independently or with a classmate. You can also give them choices in how they're assessed, such as giving them a choice between an essay based test or a multiple choice test. Now let's take a look at some common motivational barriers that adult learners may encounter when pursuing English study. When we look at these, we want to keep in mind the effective filter theory developed by Stephen Krashen, which is closely tied to motivation. The effective filter theory suggests that a learner's emotional state can act as a barrier or a filter to language learning and can either facilitate or prevent learning. What we want is for learners' affective filter to be low, which happens when learners feel relaxed, motivated, and confident, and allows more information to be processed, which leads to more successful learning. What we do not want is for students' affective filter to be high, which happens when they feel negative emotions like stress, anxiety, or demotivation. When the effective filter is high, less information is processed, which prevents learning from happening. So, the first barrier that can raise students' effective filter and prevent learning is work and family obligations, particularly those that are stressful. These obligations may also create challenges for students in terms of time management. And if students start falling behind in their studies, this could create additional feelings of stress and anxiety. Another potential barrier is the fact that adult learners have varying educational experiences and therefore varying knowledge of study skills and strategies. Learners who do not possess good study skills may experience lower levels of self confidence or higher levels of anxiety if they can't keep up with class demands, which can raise their affective filter and prevent them from progressing. Adult learners enter the classroom with a lot on their minds, as we've established, and this is where proper scaffolding and reducing students' cognitive load can make all the difference. Scaffolding means providing support, such as clear instructions, models, or examples, to help students learn a new task or concept. It's like giving them the tools they need to complete a task before throwing them into the task. Proper scaffolding naturally helps to prevent a high cognitive load, which is the amount of mental effort that learners need to perform a task or learn new information. If learners experience a high cognitive load, it increases the demands placed on their short term memory, which can lead to mental exhaustion, difficulty processing information, or reduced performance. We want to lower students' cognitive load so they can process information more efficiently without feeling mentally exhausted. Adult learners also need clarity on what they're expected to do and how well they're progressing towards their goals. Without this, they may feel reluctant to participate and may even experience disinterest in learning. Similarly, if there is lack of feedback on their development, learners will be unable to assess their progress, which could trigger feelings of frustration or make them feel like giving up. Finally, each student is unique as an individual, and different students may demonstrate different levels of fear, embarrassment, anxiety, or self confidence, depending on many factors, including personality attributes and past experiences with school or English education. If a student had a bad past experience learning English, they may feel higher levels of fear and anxiety in the classroom. Likewise, if students experienced environments where they were penalized for making mistakes, they may have higher levels of embarrassment and need more emotional support to try new things in class. So, by now, we've talked all about who adult learners are and explored some common barriers to motivation that they may face. Now, let's look at some strategies for maintaining adult learners' engagement and motivation in the classroom. The first strategy we'll discuss is setting clear classroom expectations. As we said earlier, adult learners need clear classroom expectations from their instructor to know what's expected of them and what they need to do to see results. On the first day of class, it's especially important to go over the key expectations you have of your students and give them the opportunity to ask questions. It's important that this conversation be delivered in a positive tone. You don't want your expectations to just come across as a list of do's and don'ts. You also want the expectations to be clear and easy to understand. Depending on the level you're teaching, you may need to adjust your language and delivery to help your students understand your expectations. So, this slide shows an example of how you could do this for a group of lower level learners. You can use images to support comprehension, as well as short lines of text with keywords bolded and easily identifiable. You can present this virtually in a slide deck, or you can write the expectations on the board before class. After going over your expectations verbally, share the written expectations with students either physically or online via email or your course webpage so they can reference them later. In more advanced classes, you can do more with expectation setting by gaining a mutual commitment from the class. You can do this by creating a set of shared classroom expectations, which involves learners in creating the classroom environment they want to see. To start the process, ask your students to get into pairs or groups and answer these questions or other similar questions. Questions you could ask your students include: how can I be a good classmate? What are some examples of respectful classroom behavior? What do I need to make progress in my studies? How do I need, or what do I need rather, to feel safe and supported? How should I communicate with the teacher if I need help? And what expectations do my classmates and teachers have of me? You can walk around the room and help facilitate the conversation. While they're speaking, ask for each group to take notes so they can later contribute to a larger discussion. And once everyone's had a chance to discuss, ask a representative from each group to share what they talked about. You can then compile everyone's answers into a list, either on the board or in a Word document that is screen shared if you have access to a projector. Once everything is listed, ask the group to choose their top 5 to 10 expectations to create the final list of expectations for the term. If there's something missing from the list, you as the instructor can also add it at that time and explain why you're adding it to the list. Then share the final list of expectations with students either physically in the next class or online via email or your course webpage. So now that we've seen some examples of how you can set classroom expectations, let's take a step back and think about some classroom expectations that would be helpful to set on the first day of class. So, what are some expectations that you usually set for your class or would want to set for your class on the first day?
Okay, so we want to hear from you. What are some expectations that either you already set or that you would want to begin setting for your students on that first day? And Jennifer, while we're waiting for those responses to come in, we do have some comments and a question that I'd like to share with you. The comment, excuse me, the first one is from Fiona, who said, amazing stuff, much obliged. And then we heard from Luminita, who said, positivity plus sense of humor plus clear tasks equal success. Karima said, I do love it. Clear classroom expectations. I have to use it in my classroom. Thank you so much for sharing. Now we're starting to get some responses in. Selma said, mutual respect. Then another one of our participants said, I would like to get to know them better and be able to talk about themselves. Then we heard from Dr. Arshad Malik, who said, share ground rules with your students. Santi says, to create a good atmosphere for them. Then we heard from Vasula, who said, my students know that we always start lessons with an idiom. Sophie said, I expect to see them being polite to each other. Muhamina said, respect everyone in the classroom. So that is a rule in that classroom. Then we heard from Ned, who said, as a teacher, I do expect attentiveness and respect to all. And finally, one more participant said, a positive and motivating environment is the expectation. So back to you, Jennifer.
Thank you, everyone. Those were some great expectations to set for sure. All right, so the next strategy we'll look at is setting clear learning goals. One way of doing this is to set SMART goals at the lesson, chapter, and course level. SMART is an acronym that stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. When setting learning goals, try to incorporate as many of these elements as possible to ensure the goals are clear for your students. So on the slide, I have included an example of what chapter level goal setting could look like for a group of lower level learners. You can see I've displayed the goals in chart format to facilitate comprehension. I've also tried to include specific information on what students will learn and what they'll be able to do in a conversation after learning those grammar and vocabulary features. When you begin the lesson, start with a preview of the agenda and the learning goals for that lesson so that learners will have the opportunity to track their progress and identify any gaps they may still have at the end of the lesson. At the end of the lesson, you can also give an assessment on the progress that the class made towards the learning goals so they can get feedback on where they are and what they still need to master. And this is an example of what course level goal setting could look like for the same group of lower level learners. You can give this course level goal sheet on the first day of class and walk students through the items on the list so they can track their progress as they move through your course. You can see that I've selected to use a checklist format here so learners can put a check mark next to the things they feel they can do at the end of the course. And, the ones they need to keep practicing, they wouldn't check the box for. For items that need additional practice, do give recommendations on materials that students can review outside of class or how they can continue to work on the material so they can eventually put that check next to that box. And this will help to keep them motivated. To help adult learners overcome motivational barriers and lower their affective filter, it's also important for educators to start each class on a positive note to set the tone for the rest of the class. As students enter, interact warmly with them and engage them in conversation about their daily life, their weekend plans, or other such topics. And at the start of each class, do review the material that you covered in the previous class and answer any remaining questions students have to lower their cognitive load and prevent mental exhaustion by making the content fresh in their minds again. When possible, you can also use warm-up activities, games, or icebreakers to bring some excitement into the class. So this is an example of a game that you could incorporate into your class, and it's one of my favorites to play. It's called the hot seat, and I've personally found that pretty much all students, even adult students, really do get into this game. It's a really lively way to review vocabulary or just keep things interesting, right, for students. So the way you play is you first split the class into teams, and then while they're doing that, you, as the instructor, will place a set of chairs at the front of the room, and you want the back of the chair facing the board. These chairs will be the hot seat, and each team will need to send one representative to sit in one of those chairs at a time. So you should have one chair for each team that you created. So if you have 3 teams, you would need to have 3 chairs. So once those representatives from the teams are seated in those chairs, you will write a vocabulary word or phrase of your choosing somewhere on the board where the students in the hot seat can't see it. The students in the hot seat are going to need to guess the word or the phrase that you wrote on the board, and they have to do that using clues provided by their teammates in the audience. So their teammates will read the word and they will need to describe that word using synonyms, definitions, or other means to get their teammate in the hot seat to guess the word correctly. However, they are not allowed to say the word on or the phrase that's on the board. And the students in the hot seat have to guess the correct word in a short period of time, about 1 to 2 minutes. If a student in the hot seat guesses the word correctly first, then they win the point for their team. However, if none of the students guess the word correctly, then nobody gets any points and the teams need to send new representatives into the hot seat. The great thing about this game is it can be adapted easily to different class sizes and used for different language levels. So now that I've shown you an example of a game that you can play to start class on a positive note, I'd love to hear from you for your ideas on other warm-ups, icebreakers, or games that could be used at the start of class to lower students' affective filter and increase their engagement and learning potential.
Jennifer, this is one of my absolute favorite games. I love vocabulary games, and I can't wait to see what other games our participants are using or activities they're using to lower that affective filter in their students when they enter the classroom. So let's see what we have coming in so far. Well, we have several comments for you, Jennifer. We have Umi, who said smart, as referencing the SMART goals, are the best. And then we have Laura, who said the goals checklist. It looks like a competencies checklist, So I have to develop my objectives based on this. Then another one of our participants said, yes, I agree. It's crucially important to start the lesson with a positive note. Students are more relaxed and likely to study. Then we heard from Karima, who said, what is the best, well, this is the question. What is the best time to study English as an adult? Because as a teacher, I have noticed that they feel so tired after work in the evening that it's difficult to retain information. What are your thoughts on that, Jennifer?
Yeah, that's a tough one because I think sometimes we don't always have a choice in that matter, right? As adult learners, sometimes the only classes we can, fit into our schedule are those night classes, after we finish work for the day or things like that. So I don't know if there's always an ideal time. And I also think everyone's different. So the ideal time would probably be different, from individual to individual. But I'd say if you are teaching night classes, I did. I actually primarily taught night classes in the community college setting. I'd say it's really important what you do at the beginning of class, what we're discussing, right? Understanding that your students might be coming there tired after a long day of work and bringing in this positive tone and this life might help wake them up, and get their juices flowing again in their
Mhm.
brain, right? So they can pay attention. Um, so that would really be my take on it. I can't say there's going to always be an ideal time, but there's definitely strategies we can employ to help, wake them up in whatever time it is, right, that they're studying with us.
That's great. Thank you so much for that answer, Jennifer. And thank you for your question. We have some responses to the group discussion question as well. We heard from Sonia, who said, these strategies are very good. So it sounds like her plan is to employ the strategies you shared, Jennifer. Then we heard from Umi, who said, the hot seat is a wonderful activity. I tried it and it works magic. My classroom filled with laughter and learning, and that's what we want. Then we heard from Tina, who said, I sometimes start with good news and bad news. That helps to level their attention and motivation and get them engaged. We heard from Umi again, who said charades too are great. And then we heard from Mercedes, who said review and icebreakers are used in my daily classes. Peppy said Pictionary. I love them. Then we heard from another participant who said tongue twisters. We heard from Laura, who said drawing something on the board related to the topic for them to guess. Songs is another idea that our participants use. Another teacher, Cesar, said, we play a game called Pass the Ball for the vocabulary. Kasabian said, Simon Says. Makira says, bingo. So sometimes it doesn't have to be a new and complicated game, does it, Jennifer?
No, not at all.
Okay, back to you.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for sharing, everybody. Those were some great recommendations. Okay, so another important way to start class on a positive note is by providing scaffolding or a step-by-step structure so your learners can follow along with the progression of your lesson. To do this, you can write or project an agenda on the board that establishes your plan for the day. So this is an example of the kind of agenda I used to write for my students. And as you can see, it's pretty, clear and straightforward. I always included time to review content from the prior class at the beginning before launching into any new practice activities to help lighten students' cognitive load. I also built up gradually from more basic tasks like sentence completion to more complex tasks like role plays. This gradual progression from the basic to the complex will equip your learners with the tools and the confidence they need to perform each task. Also, if you plan to assign homework, you can include that in your agenda so your students are not surprised when you assign it to them later. Another key characteristic of adult learners is their desire for practical application and real world scenarios in the language classroom. And there's no shortage of ways you can incorporate practical learning into your classroom, so you can exercise a lot of creativity in this area. When deciding how to incorporate real world elements into your lessons, think about how you can connect to your students' interests and goals. Also, think about how you can personalize learning to your specific group of learners. So, for instance, if you know that many of your students aspire to enter the medical field, think about how you could incorporate language that may be useful in a medical context. Where possible, use authentic materials or resources that were created for genuine real world purposes and not specifically for teaching, so students can make that instant connection between what they're studying in class and its application in real life contexts. You could consider using materials such as menus, flyers, maps, or even social media posts. One thing my students always loved was when I taught them features of natural speech that they could encounter in conversations. They especially loved when I taught them American English pronunciation features, common idioms, which are expressions that are established in the language whose meaning can't be understood from the literal meaning of the words, such as it's raining cats and dogs for it's raining heavily. And they also liked when I taught them collocations, which are combinations of words that commonly occur together and sound wrong if separated or replaced by other words, such as do homework, right? We always say do homework, and it sounds strange if you say make homework. Learning these types of things always motivated my students because it helped them feel better equipped to have conversations with native speakers. Another thing my students loved was asking their own questions about the language that confused them in their daily life. Creating an environment where students can ask you their questions about the language that's being used in their real life circumstances helps them feel they're getting the answers they need to overcome gaps in their knowledge and make progress. So, I wanted to show some practical application examples for different language levels. And we'll start with beginners. So, in teaching beginners, try to incorporate real world vocabulary words and phrases into lessons and activities. One way you can do this is by using dialogues and role play scenarios to simulate real world conversations in a structured manner. I find that adult learners really enjoy seeing real world language used in the context of dialogues and role plays, particularly at lower levels. You can present the dialogue by either writing it on the board or printing it out and distributing it to the class. Or you could even project the dialogue on a PowerPoint slide or a Word document if you have a projector. You want to start by reading the lines of the dialogue and teaching any language or phrases that are unfamiliar. You also want to point out any natural or real world language that's present in the dialogue, like, what about you? Or that's so cool in our sample dialogue here. Then let students have a chance to practice the dialogue together in groups and have them switch roles as they go. And once everyone's practiced, invite some pairs to come up to the front and to try the dialogue in front of the class to receive some feedback on their performance. For intermediate levels, peer collaboration and group work is a great way to encourage shared learning and create positive, collaborative, positive and collaborative culture in the classroom. So, to draw the connection between class material and real world applications, have students complete tasks or projects that require real world communication skills and language use, like writing a resume or giving a presentation on a topic of interest, or even creating a travel itinerary. And on the slide here, you'll see an example of how you could assign the task of creating a travel itinerary for a dream vacation. When assigning tasks and projects, make sure to give clear prompts for learners on how to approach the task. Give the prompts in both written and verbal format as well, either on the board, a printout, a PowerPoint slide, or even as a assignment module in a course web page. You should also give your learners flexibility in terms of how they complete and submit the final assignment to promote autonomy over their learning. For example, you could allow your learners to present their travel itinerary either as a flyer that is created in Canva or Adobe, a bullet point list that they create in Microsoft Word, a PowerPoint presentation, or even just a verbal presentation delivered in class. For advanced levels who have a higher mastery of the language, incorporate authentic materials like news articles, TED Talks, or podcast episodes, and explicitly teach the complex language features within these materials. Based on the information that's covered in the materials, I would also incorporate group discussions and other opportunities that allow students to apply their background knowledge on the subject. So, this is an example of how you can incorporate a group discussion into a listening class. In this example, students will hear a podcast episode on how to make decisions under pressure or uncertainty. Before listening to the podcast, you could have students think about and discuss the kinds of decisions that are hard for them to make, how they typically make difficult choices, and if they've ever made a decision and changed their mind later. You could also have students engage in this conversation after listening as an extension activity. You can provide the discussion prompts in writing on the board, in a printed handout, or you could project them on the screen for students to look at during their conversations. So, like we said, there's really no shortage of ways that you can incorporate practical real world learning into your classroom. So, what I want to ask is apart from what we've mentioned so far, how else can you incorporate practical applications and real world scenarios when teaching adult learners?
You've given so many insightful activities to choose from already, Jennifer, but we still want to hear from you. How can you incorporate practical applications and real world scenarios when teaching adult learners? I'm sure you all are already doing some pretty incredible things. And so, yes, you're telling us about them. Lumita said, I use pictures to see how learners interact with them. It's really amazing how they describe them. Then we heard from Selma, who said, do action research. Mercedes says, students like role plays a lot. Then we heard from Karima, who said, talk shows. Lorena said, talking about money, advises how to spend money in a supermarket, such as buying food. Then we heard from Umi, who said, news articles and TED Talks really helped me with my access students. I strongly recommend. So we have access teachers with us here today. Hello to all of you. We also have a participant who mentioned case study as one way that they can use something real world incorporated into the class. A couple of comments here I'd also like to share. Ned says, I totally agree. Adult students are so invested in learning idioms and everyday language. And then Nan says, written instructions are important to complete the task. One last comment from Peppy, who said, for intermediate advanced students, I would use a role play discussion on their meetings. For example, homework discussion. So those are some of the wonderful responses we have received from our participants. Back to you, Jennifer.
Awesome. Thanks again, everyone. Those were really great ideas we can surely implement. Okay, so at this point, we've explored strategies for maintaining adult learners' engagement and motivation in the classroom. Now, let's discuss some additional techniques for supporting adult learners of various proficiency levels in their English learning journey. So, when it comes to strategies for beginners, When teaching beginners, it's a good idea to keep the class structure and the order of class the same so they know what to expect from class to class. Try to incorporate real world vocabulary into lessons and activities through dialogues and role plays to simulate real world conversations. Throughout your lessons, give explicit in the moment feedback on students' language use so they can assess their progress and development. And where possible, teach real world vocabulary, words, and phrases outside of what's in the textbook so students can learn more about the language they'll encounter in the real world. So, this is an example of how you can teach real world language for beginners. And this is actually something I did used to teach myself with my beginners. So, let's say the textbook teaches the phrase, "Where is the restroom?" Very common, phrase for beginners to learn.
Mhm.
So, restroom is one of those words that can be replaced by any of the other words on the right side of the page, depending on the context, with slight variations in meaning. So, for example, restroom is often considered more polite in most contexts than bathroom or toilet. So, you could teach other words like bathroom or toilet and discuss how those differ in meaning as well as in contextual use. And you may find that this differs across countries and also across conversational situations. So, in my experience, adult learners find these kinds of conversations on contextual use and variations in meaning between related words very interesting, as they're usually unaware of these types of variations in the language, and they think that learning those variations will help them achieve a higher level of conversational fluency in the language. For advanced levels, one of the best things to do is to directly link language development to your learner's career goals and aspirations outside of class. So, for example, if you know many of your students aspire to enter careers in the business sector, you can teach some of the different collocations, which again are those combinations of words that commonly occur together and sound incorrect if the words are separated or replaced by other words, of which there are so many that are used in the business setting. So on the slide, I've included just some examples of common collocations that can be found in business settings, like meet deadlines, boost sales, make a profit, or cut costs. In class, you can teach your learners the meaning of these collocations, and you can illustrate how the collocations would be used in context. To do this, you can provide examples of the collocations used in authentic sources, like segments of articles in common business publications like the Wall Street Journal or Harvard Business Review, or you could even bring in clips from news broadcasts from sources like the BBC or Bloomberg. Okay, so now that we've covered a wide variety of ways to make lessons engaging for adult learners, I'd like to give you all the opportunity to apply what you've learned today by completing a wrap up activity. In this activity, I've given a sample lesson plan on the slide for a group of intermediate level adult learners. And I'd like for you to give recommendations on strategies that can be implemented to enhance this lesson and make it more engaging for the group of students. So, as you can see, the topic of this lesson today is grammar future forms, such as will or be going to. The warm up for the lesson is a review of homework from the last class on future forms. After the homework review, the plan is to work on exercises from the grammar book and then complete a multiple choice grammar quiz. The wrap up for the lesson will be a check of the answers to the grammar quiz. So, based on this information, what strategies do you think could be implemented to enhance this lesson plan and make it more engaging for the students?
Okay, so you've heard a lot of great ideas. You're doing a lot of great ideas out there in the field. And so we want to hear some of those ideas of how you would enhance this lesson using and making it more engaging for your students. See, responses come in quickly. And so we have heard from Ernesto already, who said use real life materials, such as pictures and magazine pages. Then we heard from another participant who said we could start with a warm up game to make this a bit more engaging. Fiona said lead in with relevant videos. Then we heard from Manuel, who said include oral discussions. Selma said introduce co-locations would be a way to make it more engaging. Manuel said students can have a debate about the topic. Jacqueline said, think about yourself 10 years from now as a way to make it more engaging. Um, Talk about technology in the future is what another participant said. Lorena said, make flyers about future plans for travel. And so our participants have a lot of ideas for how we could make this lesson a bit more engaging. One more just came in from Nectaria, who said, provide quick, constructive feedback through many assessments or games to boost confidence. So those are some of our participants' responses. Back to you.
Wow, those were excellent recommendations, everybody. And I can definitely say, after hearing those improvements, I do think that our group of students will be much more motivated and engaged in this lesson.
Mhm.
All right, so at this point, we've accomplished all of our learning goals for the webinar. But before we go, let's summarize the main takeaways we reviewed together today. So to help adult learners succeed in the English language classroom, set clear classroom expectations and language learning goals, scaffold lessons appropriately and provide an agenda at the start of class. Lower students' affective filter by starting class on a positive note. Integrate practical applications and real-world scenarios suitable for the class level. Demonstrate the relevance of class material to students' career and personal success. Create opportunities for flexibility and autonomy over learning. And make lessons engaging and give learners a voice in the learning process. As our final discussion today, I'd like to ask everyone to reflect on and share one concept, activity, or strategy that you can take away from today's webinar and implement in your classroom.
So, Jennifer, this is always the most exciting question at the end of each one of our webinar sessions for me, because we want to know how are our participants going to use the information today that they received. So let's see what some of the ideas are for how what you shared will be used. Manuel said, well, first, thank you for this excellent webinar. That's Manuel's comment. And then some of our participants have said they're going to start with a warm up game. Another participant said, I'm going to use the hot seat. And then we heard from another participant who said, and this is Tina, give learners a voice. So allow them to help to create the expectation. Zeddy said, use more scaffolding is what Zeddy's going to do. Then Laura said, think about the affective filter. We heard from Miriam, who said collocations are what she is the takeaway she will use. So Rob said, teaching students according to their understanding. Then we heard from Karima, who said, all your strategies are engaging. Thus, I will be using them all. especially for my adult students who study in the evening. Thank you very so much. Then we heard from Rabia, who said, podcast and scaffolding according to your instructions. So I'm sure that more responses are coming in, and even if we didn't read yours out, we hope you will continue this conversation on social media, but as well with for those of you who are in viewing groups, with your viewing groups. Okay, so back to you, Jennifer.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, everyone, for sharing your thoughts and your takeaways with us. These are the references that I used in today's presentation, and I really do hope that you enjoyed today's session and found it valuable for your teaching practice. I appreciate all of your active participation and engagement in today's webinar, and I wish you all the best in your adult teaching journey.
And we want to thank you too, Jennifer, for all of these wonderful strategies for promoting motivation and engagement in the adult English language classroom.